You're looking good, and it feels good to be with you today. Hello, I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, and this is News with the Eyes of Faith. Item 1. Joe Biden is still president. Moving on, this week we had the vice president debate, and it's kind of interesting because is it really relevant? You're not voting for the vice president, you're voting for the president. However, it was a bit telling. First of all, boys and girls, this was what it was like to have a nice civil debate. Respect, comity. These are two adults debating, so I hope you never forget it. Walz was using the expression unstable. It apparently was his talking point. Neuro-linguistic programming, that getting that lodged into your brain that Trump's unstable. And frankly, I would have said at this point in the country's history, we need unstable. Look at the way the world's going. We need someone who's a little bit of a crazy maker to shake things up. But I wasn't debating. That's armchair quarterbacking. Vance was clearly the energy monster. Walz was just another Joe Biden. So make an informed voting choice. You remember how Dallin H. Oaks, next item, Dallin H. Oaks in General Conference spoke about the Constitution? Well, former Secretary of State John Kerry said, there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have some accountability on facts, etc. But look, if people only go to one source, and that source they know is sick, and it has an agenda, and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major roadblock to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. Okay. The New Yorker had an article called "Time to Torch the Constitution." Do you see what's going on right here? Now, first of all, no one has infinite knowledge. Human beings are limited. We have knowledge in certain areas, but not all areas. And so how we do this is just come together and we talk it out. Who decides what is fact and what is not fact? Who decides what is information and not information? We actually don't have a good way to do this, and he's advocating censorship. Tyranny is what the former Secretary of State's advocating. That's where it leads. New Yorker. It's funny, the New Yorker magazine relies upon the First Amendment to exist, freedom of the press, and they want to torch what's giving them the ability to do what they're doing. They're sitting on a branch and sawing the branch that they're sitting on. Now, part of the reason why this has traction and credibility is because of the teachers' union and public schools and broader cultural trends. Generation X, Generation Y, Millennials, and Generation Z, they've been inculcated certain things. One area is reductionism. They're taught that the U.S. Constitution is just merely a slave document, and also the U.S. Constitution was written by white male aristocracy to preserve power. Well, everyone has self-interest and they do things, and the same thing with John Kerry, because if he's the one who controls information, he's in control of everything. And there's a reason why President Dallin H. Oaks spoke about the Constitution. If you're on the left and you hate the Constitution, you really need to do some deep self-assessment and psychotherapy. It's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. But how do you manage human nature? And if you're really naive about human nature, that people are good and they have infinite knowledge, that is not how reality functions. It's an anti-reality idea. More the confusocracy here. Next item, Probe Ministries, which is an evangelical site I follow, and I recommend listening to their podcast. You can, as always, play it at double speed. And they had this article. It said, Gen Z, the generation that ends Christian influence in America. Gen Z, the generation that ends Christian influence in America. Now, this is coming from Protestant point of view, so Latter-day Saints a little bit different. So they talked about this book called So the next generation will know, written by Sean McDowell and J. Warner Wallace, and they identified some key traits common among Gen Z. One, they're digital multitaskers, spending nearly every waking hour interacting with digital technology, often while watching television. Two, they're impatient, quickly moving from one thing with an intention, moving from thing to thing with an attention span of about 8 seconds, kind of like a goldfish. They're fluid, a guppy, a pollywog. They're fluid, constantly blurring the lines, making truth, genders, and family structures personal choices. 4, they are lonely, swamped in social media where personal relationships are minimized while personal troubles follow them everywhere. Sean points out the availability of endless counterfeits that claim to be able to fill their hearts with meaning. 5, they're individualistic. Individual feelings more important than facts, while judging the choices of others is avoided. As James White points out in Meet Generation Z, the ability to find whatever they're after without help of intermediaries has made them more independent. Like no other generation before, Gen Z faces a widening chasm between wisdom and information. Where's the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where's the knowledge we have lost in information? T.S. Eliot said. And so you think about these 5 points in terms of the church. You know, how do you teach a lesson with someone who has an attention span of 8 seconds? They're kind of like a pollywog swimming from here to there. It's a bit interesting. It was last week. I was talking with some of the sister missionaries of the area, and I made the comment as, you know, I grew up with the old 6 discussions in the missionary guide, and they'd shift over to preach my gospel. But now they teach lessons sometimes in 15 minutes increments. So they get the Gospels in chunks. Now, they have an app where they track to make sure everyone's taught stuff, and after they're baptized, they're retaught the missionary lessons. So we actually had separate stake missionary lessons, but I'm digressing a bit. So the missionaries are teaching people in sort of 15-minute lessons, maybe half an hour, to respect their schedule because they're busy, but also the short attention span. So what happens when you say, okay, we want you to come to church for 2 hours or sit through an hour-long endowment session? You see what this is doing to people's testimony, the short attention span, but also the structural incoherence of postmodernism. They want autonomy, but they also want relationships. You know, everyone wants to live by their own sets of rules, but you can't have communities when we have community when everyone's playing by their own sets of rules. Read section 1 in Isaiah, all we like sheep have gone astray. Next item, it's a recipe for catastrophe. Next lesson, Deseret News had an opinion piece by Trent Staggs and Alicia Staggs. They said they can't seem to look past his purported personality to see that we are better off under Trump's policies. We all have faults. Why can they overlook Vice President Kamala Harris's faults, but not Trump's? Yeah, call people on their double standard. If people have a double standard, just say, hey, look, this feels like a double standard. How do you see it? You know, you can forgive Harris with her meandering word salads, but you can't forgive Trump. Okay, there's a report out that FEMA ran out of money because we're giving it to illegal aliens. I have a link to a Newsweek article which talks about that. Now, this is disputed. Remember the dangers of instant certainty. You hear a report and you get this intense emotional response and you start babbling out stuff. No, that's not how things work. You sit there and have a cool, collected, and rational study. You sit there and pay attention as facts emerge through the storm of events. But also raises a question, is that America does not have an infinite supply of capital. We're already running on credit right now, taking loans. We've run out of money. We've run out of money as long as I've been. We haven't had money as long as I've been alive. The Book of Mormon, King Benjamin says you do things in wisdom and order, according to wisdom and order. Section 10 says you do things according to strength and means. You manage what you have and work accordingly. And then the allegory of the olive tree, it talks about how the branches overcome the roots. They start grafting in these branches, and what happens is you have too many branches, it just takes energy away from the trunk of the tree and the roots, and it kills the tree. That's the same thing with immigration and handouts. The more handouts and the more people you live in here, that collapses the system, and you're seeing it right now. That's what's going on, is the system's collapsing. It's a creeping catastrophe, a disaster in slow motion, but you're watching it go on, and the older you get, you can see the patterns emerge. Well, Jacob Hess, and this is another opinion piece from the Deseret News, he had this article about political divided families, and he says something, or has this graph, says very liberal Americans are twice as likely, that is about 24%, to stop talking with a family member because of politics. So very liberal people stop talking because of politics. Now, why is that? Remember, it's this trifecta I talk about. On the left, they're governed by sensation, relation, and autonomy. Feelings, they want to have relationships, but they also want to have personal autonomy. And those three just do not mix, or it creates a tension. You cannot have autonomy in relationships. You kind of see what's going on with divorce. There has to be something made something has to be made. A sacrifice has to be made to preserve the relationship. But it's interesting. Keep the part about sensation. People want to feel a certain way, and sometimes you believe something that's not true in order to feel good about yourself. These feel-good falsehoods. Something's not true, but you believe it because it like the way it makes you feel in the short term. And when someone says, hey, this is a different idea, or your ideas are wrong, they don't correspond to reality, you engage in relationship terrorism, which is a form of denial. But you start hurting people, you insult people, because they're making you feel a different way. You just want to live in this gilded cage, in this fool's paradise. Well, we're here to tell you the house is on fire. It's not the neighbors holding a barbecue, and it's not because the thermostat's broken. The house is on fire. Well, that's kind of news. I could actually go on, but I want to keep this kind of short and sweet. So let's go to the intellectual ammunition phase of this podcast. Now, someone says Trump is evil, Trump is bad, he's an insurrectionist. Point out that the insurrection, that's actually covered in the second impeachment. And then he asked the person, what do you know that Congress doesn't know? Congress investigated it. They investigated the FBI, and he wasn't removed from office. It just did not work. But you apparently believe something or know something that Congress has missed. What is it, and how do you know it? On top of that, you say, yeah, Trump is a horrible person, but I forgive him. He doesn't have the fullness of the gospel. You pray to have charity for him. And the same thing applies to Harris. You forgive Harris. This doesn't mean you vote for them. But if someone says Trump's bad, say, yeah, that's right. Everyone's imperfect. And you're just fine dealing with Harris's imperfections, but not with Donald Trump's. And you're believing things that just are not true. So, there you go. That's the intellectual ammunition. Respond to that way. Just say, I forgive Trump. Now here's a life hack section. Sometimes in life you get these repetitive conversations. You just keep talking to someone, they just keep saying the same things over and over again, re-explaining stuff, talking about the same issues. Well, what a good approach to that is just to call them on it. Say, okay, we've already had this conversation. Why do we need to have this conversation again when we've already had it? What's changed? Where are you going with having the same conversation over and over again? Down HO's talk, where will this lead? The point is that Sun Tzu talked about when you go to war, you don't fight an army, you attack the strategy, you balk their plans. And repetitive conversations are an avoidance tactic. It's a delay tactic. If someone's trying not to do something, and so they say, okay, we need to clarify it. That's another tactic. We need to have this repetitive conversation to clarify stuff. Well, now you already understand it. You just don't want to accept it or live it. So that's your life hack today, is when someone's you get repetitive conversation, say we already had this conversation. And there you go. That's news with the eyes of faith. Thank you.